Quentin Tarantino doesn't just make movies, he rewrites the rules of cinema. So when he declares which westerns truly matter, you know it's going to stir debate. Forget the dusty cowboy cliches, or the predictable good versus bad tales you've seen recycled 100 times. Tarantino's list pulls from gritty Italian shootouts, bleak American epics, and even surprising modern flops he insists deserve respect. Which films does he hold above the rest, and what strange reasons does he give? Let's ride straight into the only westerns that really count, according to the master himself. The Hellbenders, 1967. Tarantino loves westerns where morality is tossed into the dust, and The Hellbenders is exactly that. Directed by Sergio Corbucci, the Italian master of bleak landscapes, this story throws you into the aftermath of the Civil War. Instead of noble redemption, we get Colonel Jonas, a stubborn ex-Confederate determined to resurrect his cause by smuggling stolen cash hidden inside a coffin. Yes, a coffin. From there, the film becomes a grim road trip through betrayal, suspicion, and endless violence. Tarantino admires how The Hellbenders refuses to give audiences a hero to root for. In his words, everybody is the bad guy, and that's the film's secret strength. Unlike polished Hollywood westerns of the 1950s, Corbucci's world is merciless. The desert sun doesn't just scorch, it exposes the corruption in every character. What makes it stand out is its rawness. The coffin isn't just a prop. It's a symbol of how these men drag death along with them wherever they go. The film pushes the boundaries of the spaghetti western, layering in a dark sense of irony that Tarantino later echoed in The Hateful Eight. It's not a crowd pleaser or a sweeping epic. Instead, it's ugly, unsettling, and unforgettable. That's exactly why Tarantino ranks it so highly. It dares to make everyone complicit in the dirt of the frontier. Winchester, 73, 1950. This isn't just a western. It's the film that transformed James Stewart from a clean-cut everyman into a rugged cowboy icon. Directed by Anthony Mann, Winchester 73 follows a prized rifle as it passes from one unlucky owner to another, leaving a trail of obsession, betrayal, and downfall in its wake. It's almost like the Elder Wand from Harry Potter, only with dust, sweat, and a whole lot more grit. Tarantino has long praised Mann as one of his favorite directors, calling this movie the crown jewel of their 6 collaborations. And it's easy to see why. Each transfer of the rifle tells a miniature story, painting a broad canvas of greed and desire across the Wild West. What starts as a personal feud between Stewart's character and outlaw Dutch Henry Brown evolves into something much bigger, a portrait of how violence and ambition infect everyone, from gamblers to drifters. What Tarantino really admires is the film's structure. Instead of one straightforward showdown, the rifle becomes the thread stitching together multiple stories. Every new owner believes they can control it, but the weapon ends up controlling them. That sense of inevitability influenced the way Tarantino builds tension in his own films, letting objects and symbols, whether it's a glowing suitcase or a candy-colored revolver, drive the story forward. Winchester 73 may not scream spaghetti western, but in Tarantino's eyes, it was revolutionary. It proved that a western could carry psychological depth, twisty storytelling, and still keep audiences glued to the screen. Django, 1966. Before Tarantino's Django Unchained shocked theaters in 2012, there was Sergio Corbucci's original masterpiece, Django. Starring Franco Nero, this film didn't just create a character, it sparked an entire subgenre. The story follows a Union soldier turned drifter caught between Mexican revolutionaries and Confederate renegades. His only constant companion? A coffin he drags through the mud, concealing a deadly secret inside. Tarantino reveres Django not just for its style, but for its influence. Over 30 unofficial sequels tried to cash in on its success, though none matched Corbucci's flair. The film's muddy streets, nihilistic tone, and unrelenting violence marked a turning point in Western cinema. Gone were the clean, sunlit plains of John Ford. Instead, audiences got a world where morality was blurred and survival was the only law. The film's soundtrack by Luis Bacalov and its unforgettable opening scene have been echoed in countless movies since, including Tarantino's own. He even gave Franco Nero a cameo in Django Unchained as a wink to fans who knew the original. What made Django so radical was its refusal to play safe. The D is silent, but its impact on cinema is deafening. Tarantino calls it one of the most important westerns ever made. And watching it today, you can see why. It's as stylish as it is ruthless, redefining what audiences could expect from the genre. Navajo Joe, 1966. Burt Reynolds once dismissed Navajo Joe as a career low point, but Tarantino disagrees. For him, it's one of the most electrifying revenge stories ever told. Another Sergio Corbucci entry, this film cast Reynolds as a lone Navajo warrior tracking the gang that destroyed his people. The setup is simple, but the execution is ferocious. Reynolds, dressed in fringe and grit, delivers what Tarantino called a one-man tornado onslaught. He's relentless, tearing through enemies with single-minded fury. The story doesn't waste time with sentiment. It's about pure retribution. Corbucci's vision of the Wild West here is darker than ever, surreal and pitiless, a landscape where justice comes only through fire and determination. What elevates Navajo Joe beyond pulp is Ennio Morricone's thunderous score. Tarantino has singled it out as one of the maestro's most unforgettable compositions, and fans will recognize it instantly. It's been sampled in everything from Tarantino trailers to hip-hop tracks. The movie's reputation has grown over time, largely because of Tarantino's advocacy. Where critics once scoffed, he pointed out its energy, its brutality, and its style. For him, this film didn't just tell a revenge story. It embodied the primal spirit of the Western at its rawest. Navajo Joe may not have launched Reynolds to stardom, but in Tarantino's canon, it's essential. It's Western filmmaking stripped to its bare, furious core. Ulzana's Raid, 1972. If you think Westerns are only about dusty towns and quick draws, Ulzana's Raid will set you straight. Directed by Robert Aldrich, this is a bleak, unflinching look at the endless cycle of conflict between Native Americans and settlers in the Arizona frontier. Burt Lancaster stars as an aging Army scout tasked with tracking down Apache raiders, but the movie quickly becomes more than a pursuit. It's a meditation on survival, fear, and cultural collision. Screenwriter Alan Sharp described the film as an allegory about the malevolence of the world itself. Tarantino agrees, calling it Aldrich's best work of the 1970s and one of the greatest westerns of the decade. Unlike Hollywood's glossy takes, Ulzana's Raid doesn't sanitize the past. It shows the harshness of the frontier without flinching, revealing the toll of violence on everyone involved, from soldiers to civilians. What sets it apart is its moral complexity. Lancaster's scout isn't a spotless hero. He's weary, pragmatic, and often conflicted. The film forces viewers to confront unsettling truths about vengeance, justice, and humanity. Tarantino admires how Aldrich brought a near-documentary realism to the story, contrasting wide, beautiful landscapes with brutal choices made in the dust. The Vietnam War was raging when this film was released, and many audiences saw it as a thinly veiled commentary on America's own struggles overseas. For Tarantino, Ulzana's Raid proves that Westerns aren't just about myth. They're about reflecting the world as it is, and sometimes that mirror is anything but pretty. Sukiyaki Western Django, 2007. Leave it to Japanese director Takashi Miike to turn the Western inside out, and leave it to Tarantino to jump right into the madness. Sukiyaki Western Django isn't just a spaghetti Western tribute. It's a wild cultural remix that blends gunslingers, samurai-inspired sword fights, and even echoes of Japanese civil wars. The result? A fever dream of dusty streets, bright kimonos, and bloody showdowns. Tarantino doesn't just admire this movie, he's in it. He plays a gravel-voiced gunman, clearly channeling Clint Eastwood, and has admitted it was a dream come true to step onto a Japanese movie stage. His cameo is both playful and sincere, proof of how much he loves this bizarre genre mashup. Miki's film pays direct homage to Sergio Leone and Sergio Corbucci, while circling back to Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, which inspired Leone's A Fistful of Dollars. In a way, it closes the cultural loop. The Japanese film that inspired spaghetti westerns comes back as a Japanese spaghetti western. Tarantino praises its unrestrained energy, calling it a work of sheer audacity. It may not be polished, but it's impossible to forget. From its over-the-top performances to its operatic music, Sukiyaki Western Django proves that the Western can thrive far from the American frontier. For Tarantino, this film matters because it refuses to play by any rules. It's messy, chaotic, and ridiculous, but in the best way possible. Stagecoach, 1939. Before Stagecoach, John Wayne was just another actor in small westerns. After Stagecoach, he was the Western star. Directed by John Ford, this film is often credited with defining the modern Western, and Tarantino acknowledges it as one of the genre's essential foundations. The plot is deceptively simple. A group of strangers travel through Apache territory by stagecoach, each carrying secrets, prejudices, and personal baggage. What begins as a tense ride turns into a fight for survival, with loyalties and suspicions tested along the way. Tarantino openly cites Stagecoach as a major influence on The Hateful Eight. Both films trap mismatched strangers together, simmering with paranoia and tension. Even the opening sequences echo one another, with strangers climbing aboard a carriage into uncertain danger. But what really makes Stagecoach matter to Tarantino is how it elevated the Western into serious cinema. Ford's sweeping Monument Valley landscapes became iconic, and his use of ensemble storytelling influenced countless directors after him. The characters weren't flat archetypes anymore. They were flawed, layered, and human. Wayne's breakout as the Ringo Kid redefined the Western hero, not as an untouchable legend, but as someone rough around the edges, yet undeniably magnetic. For Tarantino, Stagecoach isn't just history, it's the blueprint for everything that came after. Little Big Man, 1970. Few westerns dared to flip the script quite like Little Big Man. Starring Dustin Hoffman as a boy raised by the Cheyenne after surviving a frontier massacre, the film follows him through a surreal, decades-long journey across the changing American West. Hoffman becomes a gunslinger, a con man, a soldier, and eventually a disillusioned witness to history. What made this movie radical was its refusal to glorify frontier myths. Instead, it directly challenged them. Native Americans are portrayed not as faceless adversaries, but as people with culture, humor, and resilience. The U.S. cavalry, on the other hand, is shown as ruthless and destructive. Released during the Vietnam War, the parallels were impossible to miss. Tarantino has praised Little Big Man for its courage in breaking away from tradition. He even called it a sister to Django Unchained, because both films highlight systemic cruelty while still telling a gripping story of survival. Hoffman may not have seemed like Western material at first, but his performance gave the film a strange authenticity. He wasn't the standard rugged cowboy. He was an everyman lost in history's chaos. For Tarantino, this film matters because it redefined what a Western could be. It wasn't just about duels and dusty towns. It was about myth versus reality, told through satire, tragedy, and biting truth. The Searchers, 1956. Ask any film scholar to name the greatest Western, and chances are they'll bring up The Searchers. Directed by John Ford and starring John Wayne, it's a film Tarantino both criticizes and reveres. He has borrowed from it countless times, recreating its famous closing shot in Kill Bill and Inglourious Basterds. The story follows Ethan Edwards, a Civil War veteran who spends years hunting for his niece, abducted by Comanche raiders. His quest becomes less about rescue and more about obsession, blurring the line between heroism and hatred. Tarantino admires the film's haunting quality. It's not a straightforward adventure, but a dark exploration of obsession, identity, and violence. Wayne's Ethan isn't a shining hero. He's a deeply flawed man, driven by bitterness. What also makes The Searchers matter is its enormous influence. Directors from Martin Scorsese to George Lucas have cited it as inspiration. Even Game of Thrones echoed its imagery in the fiery loot train battle. Tarantino has noted the contradictions in Ford's work, sometimes critical of its portrayal of Native Americans, but he respects the film's raw power and cinematic impact. For him, The Searchers embodies the Western at its most mythic and most unsettling, a paradox that still resonates today. The Lone Ranger, 2013. Yes, you read that right. Among all the gritty classics and legendary epics, Tarantino includes The Lone Ranger. Directed by Gore Verbinski, this big-budget reimagining was widely panned by critics and bombed at the box office. But Tarantino? He's a fan, at least of the first 45 minutes. The film stars Armie Hammer as John Reed, a lawyer turned reluctant hero, and Johnny Depp in a much-debated role as his Native American companion, Tonto. Together, they ride into a story that blends origin myth with larger-than-life spectacle. So why does Tarantino defend it? Because he values boldness over perfection. He's praised the movie's energy, particularly in its opening sequences, which he believes capture the thrill and spectacle that Westerns once delivered in their heyday. Tarantino has a soft spot for misfit movies that swing for the fences, even if they don't land cleanly. The Lone Ranger is messy, overstuffed, and uneven. But in his eyes, that risk-taking spirit is worth celebrating. For him, it proves that Westerns aren't just relics of the past. They can still inspire big, ambitious experiments, even in the modern blockbuster era. With these 5, Tarantino's list takes us from a Japanese genre mashup to a Hollywood bomb he insists deserves a second look. If nothing else, it shows that his taste is unpredictable, daring, and always passionate. And we're not done yet. The final stretch of his Western canon includes Leone, Peckinpah, and the films that define the genre's ultimate edge. Stay tuned, the legends are about to ride in. Rio Bravo, 1959. Ask Tarantino his single favorite movie of all time, and he won't hesitate. Rio Bravo. Directed by Howard Hawks, this isn't just a Western, it's a hangout movie disguised as one. The premise is straightforward. John Wayne plays Sheriff John T. Chance, tasked with holding a dangerous prisoner while the outlaws' gang circles, waiting to spring him free. But the real magic isn't in the gunfights. It's in the characters stuck together, passing time, arguing, and bonding. Tarantino loves how Hawks slows everything down. Instead of rushing from one showdown to another, the film luxuriates in moments of humor, friendship, and even music. Dean Martin plays a washed-up deputy battling his demons, Ricky Nelson strums a guitar, and Angie Dickinson lights up the screen as a clever saloon girl. Together, they form a mismatched family that makes the waiting as compelling as the action. For Tarantino, this movie was a blueprint for Reservoir Dogs and The Hateful Eight. He admires how Hawks built suspense through conversations, silences, and tiny character beats. He's even said that if he were stranded on a desert island with just one film, Rio Bravo would be it. More than a Western, Rio Bravo is about resilience, loyalty, and the joy of watching people simply be. Tarantino insists this is one of the only Westerns that matter, because it reminds us that tension and humanity often outweigh spectacle. The good, the bad, and the ugly 1966. If there's a Mount Rushmore of Westerns, Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly would be carved right in the center. Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Eli Wallach wander a Civil War-torn landscape in pursuit of buried treasure, each embodying the film's title. Tarantino doesn't just admire it, he treats it as sacred cinema. What sets this apart is Leone's operatic vision. Close-ups drag out every bead of sweat, every twitch of a trigger finger, while Ennio Morricone's score transforms desert duels into symphonies. The iconic showdown at Sad Hill Cemetery isn't just a gunfight, it's theater on a cosmic scale. Tarantino has said that watching this film was a revelation, a moment when he realized movies could transcend their own genre. The grit, the humor, the absurdity, and the grandeur all collide in a way that feels both mythic and grounded. It also influenced his own style, from long standoffs to ironic needle drops. Without Leone's patient tension building, It's hard to imagine Inglourious Basterds' tavern scene, or the snowbound claustrophobia of The Hateful Eight. For Tarantino, this film matters because it redefined what cinema itself could be. It's not just a Western, it's the Western that blew the genre wide open. Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. If the good, the bad, and the ugly was Leone's revolution, Once Upon a Time in the West was his opera. Tarantino has often called this the most beautiful Western ever made, and it's easy to see why. From its legendary opening, 10 wordless minutes of pure suspense at a lonely train station, to its sweeping shots of Monument Valley, the film feels larger than life. Henry Fonda shocks as a ruthless killer, Charles Bronson broods as the mysterious harmonica, and Claudia Cardinale gives one of the greatest performances in Western history as Jill McBain, a widow caught in the clash of greed and destiny. Tarantino admires how Leone stretched every scene to its breaking point, creating a rhythm more like an opera than an action film. Silence and sound collide, building unbearable tension until it explodes in violence. For him, it proved that Westerns could be as grand and poetic as any art form. The movie was initially dismissed in America but became a masterpiece in Europe, influencing generations of filmmakers. Tarantino counts it among the films that shaped his cinematic DNA, especially in its mix of brutality and lyricism. For him, Once Upon a Time in the West matters because it elevates the genre into pure myth, a story about the death of the old frontier and the birth of modern America. Ride the High Country, 1962. Before Sam Peckinpah became famous for his gritty slow-motion battles, he directed Ride the High Country, a quieter, more elegiac Western that Tarantino treasures. The film pairs Randolph Scott and Joel McCrea as two aging gunmen hired to transport gold. One dreams of retiring honorably, the other schemes to steal the loot. Their journey is less about the cargo than about dignity, loyalty, and the choices that define a man's legacy. Tarantino has praised this movie for its melancholy tone. It's not about blazing glory, but about fading heroes trying to find their place in a changing world. Peckinpah, still early in his career, brings a poetic touch that foreshadows the darker turns he'd later take. The film's closing moments, where sacrifice and honor collide, have been cited by Tarantino as some of the most moving in Western history. Unlike the bombast of The Wild Bunch, Ride the High Country resonates with quiet power. For Tarantino, this matters because it shows how the Western could be intimate, reflective, and deeply human. It's about the twilight of legends, a theme he's echoed in his own work about fading eras and last stands. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973. Peckinpah returned a decade later with Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, a film Tarantino considers essential despite its troubled production. James Coburn plays the weary lawman Pat Garrett, while Chris Christopherson takes on the role of the charismatic outlaw Billy. Their relationship is less about good versus bad than about inevitability, friends turned adversaries by the march of history. The film is soaked in melancholy, underscored by Bob Dylan's haunting score, including the timeless Knockin' on Heaven's Door. Tarantino has often highlighted its fatalistic beauty, calling it one of the greatest films about the end of an era. Though Peckinpah battled the studio, and the film was heavily cut on release, its reputation has only grown. The restored versions reveal a masterpiece about loyalty, betrayal, and the fading of the frontier dream. Tarantino sees in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid the kind of storytelling he loves most, flawed men facing their own mortality, caught between myth and reality. It's a film that lingers, not for its spectacle, but for its mood, a slow-burning farewell to the West itself. So there you have it. The 15 Westerns that Quentin Tarantino swears are the only ones that truly matter. From grim spaghetti dusters to soulful American farewells, from operatic grandeur to box office misfires, this list proves one thing. Tarantino doesn't just love the Western, he sees it as the beating heart of cinema itself. Which of these films have you seen? And which do you think Tarantino overhypes? Drop your thoughts below And let's start a debate worthy of the Wild West. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the movies that shaped legends. After all, the frontier may be gone, but its stories still ride on.